Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. The sea mist clung to the wooden crates stacked along the Northumbrian harbor, wrapping the solitary figure in a shroud of gray. Elina Sutton sat motionless, her golden hair partially concealed beneath a linen head covering that had once been white, but was now stained with the tears and dirt of her journey. The rough-spun wool of her dress, her wedding dress, scratched against her skin, a constant reminder of the ceremony that had never been completed. 3 days she had waited, perched upon these salt-weathered crates, watching Saxon ships come and go from the harbor at Lindisfarne. 3 days since her betrothed, Ethelred, had abandoned her at the altar, fleeing with a merchant's daughter and the dowry her father had scraped together over years of toil. 3 days of shame that felt like an eternity. The tide comes in, the tide goes out, she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the crash of waves against the stone breakwater. Just as men come and go. It was a saying her mother had taught her, though she doubted her mother had intended it as comfort for an abandoned bride. What Elina could not know was that eyes watched her from the mist-shrouded sea beyond the harbor. Viking eyes. The deep blue gaze of Quentin Yormunson, second in command to Jarl Halvard of the Raven Banner, whose longship lay hidden in a cove just beyond the monastery's site. Quentin's hand gripped his sword hilt, not out of threat, but from tension. The raid was planned for dawn, when the monks would be at their earliest prayers, but something about the solitary woman had drawn him ashore early, alone, against all Viking wisdom. "You are a fool, Quentin," he muttered to himself in his native Norse as he made his way silently along the rocky shoreline. His father had named him after a Christian prisoner who had once saved his life, a name that had earned him mockery in his youth, but which he now wore as proudly as his battle scars. A curious fool. The morning sun began to burn away the mist as Quentin approached the harbor, staying low among the rocks. He was close enough now to see the woman's face, the high cheekbones still red from tears, the determined set of her jaw. She was no thrall or servant. That much was clear from her bearing and the quality of her clothing, despite its rumpled state. Elina sensed movement and turned her head, but Quentin had already slipped behind a stack of fish barrels. He pressed his back against the wood, feeling the throb of his heartbeat. The raid would begin soon. He should return to the ship, to his men. This foolish curiosity would earn him nothing but trouble. Yet he remained. From his hidden position, he heard the approach of heavy footfalls and the slurred voice of a Saxon man. "Still here, are you? The abandoned bride." The voice was cruel, taunting. Perhaps Ethelred knew something the rest of us didn't, eh? Something lacking in your womanly virtues. Quentin peered around the edge of the barrels. A broad-shouldered Saxon man stood swaying before Elina, the stench of ale evident even from a distance. The woman had risen to her feet, her posture rigid with dignity. "Return to your cups, Wilfred," she said evenly. "You dishonor yourself." The man called Wilfred laughed harshly. "I'll show you dishonor, girl. No man wants you now. You should be grateful for any attention." He reached for her arm. Before Quentin could question his own sanity, he found himself moving. In 3 swift strides, he had emerged from his hiding place and seized the Saxon's outstretched wrist. "The lady asked you to leave," Quentin said in halting Saxon, his accent thick but his grip stronger. Wilfred's bloodshot eyes widened, first in surprise, then in recognition of Quentin's foreignness, the strange cut of his clothing, the twisted gold at his wrist, the accent that marked him unmistakably as Norse. "Northman," he gasped, stumbling backward. "Viking." His shout echoed across the harbor. Quentin cursed under his breath. So much for the element of surprise. His hand went to his sword, but before he could draw it, the woman, Elina, had picked up a wooden oar and swung it with surprising force, catching Wilfred across the temple. The man crumpled to the dock with a dull thud. For a moment, Saxon woman and Viking warriors stared at each other in mutual shock. "You've killed him," Quentin said, his voice oddly calm. Elina shook her head, prodding Wilfred with her foot. He breathed still. "The ale did most of my work for me." She looked up, her green eyes meeting his with startling directness. "Why did you help me?" The distant sound of shouting reached them. Wilfred's cry had been heard. Soon the harbor would be swarming with Saxon defenders. "A question for another time." Quentin replied, grasping her elbow. Come with me now, or stay and explain to your kinsman why you're in the company of a Viking. You're raiding Lindisfarne, she said, the realization dawning in her eyes. Again, after all these years of peace. Peace? Quentin snorted. Your king's taxes and your church's condemnation are not peace. More shouting, closer now. Decision time. To his surprise, Elina dropped the oar and nodded once, sharply. Lead on, Northman. I have nothing left here anyway. And so began the unlikely journey of Quentin Yormunson and Elina Sutton, a journey that would take them across the storm-tossed North Sea, through the politics of Viking settlements, and into the dangerous waters of a love that neither culture would understand nor forgive. The raid on Lindisfarne ended before it truly began. The element of surprise lost. Jarl Halvard had ordered a swift retreat, the Raven Banner's longship slipping away from the coast with the monastery's bells pealing in alarm behind them. Quentin's unexpected passenger had been met with shocked stares and muttered curses from the crew. Have you lost your wits, bringing a Saxon woman aboard? Halvard demanded, his voice low and dangerous as they stood at the stern, far enough from Elina that she could not hear. We agreed. No captives, only treasures. The silver from the monastery, not its people. She was not in the monastery, Quentin replied, meeting his Jarl's gaze steadily. And she comes willingly. Halvard spat over the side of the ship. Willingly? No Saxon comes willingly with Vikings. What spell has she cast on you, my friend? Or was it simply the spell between her legs that addled your brain? Quentin's hand tightened on his sword hilt, a movement not lost on Halvard, whose eyes narrowed. Would you draw steel on your Jarl for a Saxon woman you met an hour ago? The tension stretched between them like a bowstring. Around them, the crew had fallen silent, watching. The only sounds were the creak of wood and the splash of oars as they drove the ship farther from the English coast. Finally, Quentin relaxed his grip. No, my Jarl, but I vouch for her with my honor. She will be no trouble. Halvard studied him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. On your head be it. But know this, at the first sign of treachery, I will throw her to the sea myself. He raised his voice to address the crew. Back to your stations. We make for Hedeby before the weather turns. As the men returned to their tasks, Quentin made his way to the middle of the ship, where Elina sat wrapped in a wool cloak one of the younger warriors had grudgingly offered her. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes fixed on the receding shoreline of her homeland. You're taking me to your settlement, she said as he sat beside her. It wasn't a question. Yes, Hedeby, on the edge of Denmark. And what am I to be there? A slave? A concubine? Her voice was steady, but he could see the tension in the way she held herself. You are under my protection, Quentin replied carefully. Nothing more, nothing less. She turned to look at him then, really look at him, as if seeing past the warrior exterior to something deeper. Why? Why risk your Jarl's anger for a woman you don't know? Quentin had been asking himself the same question since the moment he'd stepped from behind those barrels. He had no answer that made sense, even to himself. Perhaps, he said finally, it was written in the runes. A small, unexpected smile touched her lips. Do Vikings truly believe fate is carved in stone before we are born? Some do, he replied, finding himself strangely drawn to that smile. Others believe we carve our own paths. And you? He considered her question as he watched a seabird wheeling above the mast. I believe that sometimes the gods place people in our paths for reasons we do not immediately understand. Elina pulled the cloak tighter around her shoulders as a cold spray of seawater misted over the side of the ship. Your gods are mine. Does it matter? They sailed for 5 days and nights, fighting headwinds and roughening seas. By the 3rd day, Elina had found her sea legs and had begun to make herself useful, mending torn sailcloth and helping prepare the meager meals. The crew watched her warily at first, but her quiet efficiency and willingness to work gradually earned, if not their acceptance, at least their tolerance. Quentin observed her when he thought she wasn't looking. The graceful way she moved despite the pitching of the ship, the quiet dignity she maintained even when the youngest warriors made crude jests in Norse, thinking she couldn't understand. What they didn't know was that Elina had grown up in a coastal trading town, where Norse merchants sometimes wintered. She understood more than she let on. a fact she revealed to Quentin on the fourth night as they sat sharing a wooden bowl of fish stew. Your friend Bjorn has a colorful imagination regarding what happens in your sleeping quarters, she said casually in Norse, nearly causing Quentin to choke on his stew. When he recovered, he stared at her in amazement. You speak our language? Poorly, she admitted, switching back to Saxon. But I understand more than I speak. My father traded with Norse merchants. He believed knowledge was a weapon sharper than steel. A wise man, Quentin said, wondering what other surprises this Saxon woman might hold. On the fifth day, the distinctive silhouette of the Hedeby settlement appeared on the horizon. The wooden palisades surrounding the town, smoke rising from countless hearth fires, ships of various sizes dotting the harbor. As they approached, Elina stood at the rail, her face unreadable as she took in her first view of Viking lands. It's larger than I expected, she said. Hedeby is a trading center, Quentin explained, coming to stand beside her. People from many lands come here, Saxons, Franks, even traders from the Far East. You won't be the only foreigner. But I will be the only Saxon woman who arrived with raiders, she pointed out. He couldn't deny it. Stay close to me, he said instead, until people understand you are under my protection. The longship glided into the harbor, where a crowd had already gathered to welcome the returning warriors. As they disembarked, Quentin noticed the curious stares and whispered comments that followed Elina. He placed a protective hand at the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd toward the town proper. Jarl Halvard approached them before they had gone far. Quentin, a word. His eyes flickered to Elina. Alone. Quentin hesitated, looking around until he spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Freya, he called, beckoning to a tall, red-haired woman who pushed her way toward them. This is my sister, he explained to Elina. Stay with her until I return. Freya looked from her brother to the Saxon woman with undisguised curiosity. So this is the woman who has all the warriors talking? The one you risked everything for? I risked nothing, Quentin growled. Just keep her safe until I return. As he walked away with Halvard, he heard Freya say to Elina, Come, Saxon, let's find you something less noticeable to wear. The Jarl led Quentin to the great hall, empty now in the late afternoon except for a few servants preparing for the evening's feast. They stood before the central hearth, where a fire burned despite the mild spring day. The raid was a failure, Halvard said without preamble. We return with no silver, no glory, and, he gestured in the direction they had come from, a Saxon woman who will bring nothing but trouble. I take full responsibility for the raid's failure, Quentin said. As for the woman, Halvard interrupted. You will send her back on the next trading vessel that sails for Northumbria. Quentin frowned. And in the meantime? In the meantime, she is your problem. Keep her out of sight. Keep her from causing trouble. Halvard stepped closer, his voice dropping. And Quentin, do not get attached. She is Saxon, Christian. Our people have a long memory for the blood spilled between us. With that warning, Halvard strode away, leaving Quentin alone by the fire, wondering why the thought of sending Elina back to England left him with a hollow feeling in his chest. By the time he returned to his sister's house, a sturdy wooden structure near the edge of town, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the packed earth street. He found Elina sitting at the loom with Freya, already dressed in Norse clothing. A simple linen underdress with a woolen apron dress over it, held at the shoulders by two decorative brooches. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment, the sight of her in Viking garb, her golden hair braided in the northern style, stole his breath. Your sister has been kind, Elina said, rising to her feet. She's offered to let me stay here. Freya snorted. I offered no such thing. I said she could stay here with you, brother. This house has 2 rooms, after all, and you've slept here often enough when not at sea. Quentin ran a hand through his hair, a habit when he was thinking. That might be best for now, until we can arrange a return to England. Something flickered in Elina's eyes, surprise, perhaps disappointment. You're sending me back? It's Halvard's order, he said, surprised by his own reluctance. On the next trading ship. I see. She turned back to the loom, her fingers moving deftly among the threads. And when might that be? Not until after the thing, at least, Freya interjected. referring to the assembly that would take place in a fortnight. No captain will leave before the spring laws are settled. Then it seems I am your guest for at least 2 weeks, Elina said, her voice carefully neutral. I should earn my keep. I can weave, cook, mend. You are not a servant here, Quentin said sharply. Freya rose, brushing down her skirts. Everyone works in a Viking household, brother. Even unexpected guests. She headed for the door. I'm going to the feast hall. The 2 of you should join me. But, she looked pointedly at Elina. Perhaps not tonight. Let the settlement grow used to the idea of a Saxon woman in their midst first. After she left, an awkward silence fell between them. Quentin moved to the hearth, adding wood to the fire that was beginning to die down. Your sister doesn't approve of me, Elina said finally. Freya doesn't approve of much, he replied with a small smile. But she is loyal to family above all else. If I ask her to accept you, she will. And will you? Elina asked quietly. Ask her to accept me? Quentin turned to face her, suddenly aware of how alone they were, how intimate the small house felt in the gathering dusk. Why did you come with me, Elina? Truly, she met his gaze steadily. Because in that moment by the harbor, you offered something my own people had taken from me. Choice. Dignity. She paused. And perhaps because, like you, I sensed the gods had placed you in my path for a reason I don't yet understand. He took a step toward her, drawn by something in her voice, in her eyes. My people and yours have been enemies for generations. Yet here we are, she said simply. Neither enemy nor friend. Yet, the word hung between them, full of possibility. Yet, he echoed, and for the first time since leaving England's shores, he smiled a true smile. Days stretched into a week, and Elina found herself settling into the rhythm of life in Hedeby. Each morning she rose early, helping Freya with household tasks or accompanying her to the market, where her Saxon accent drew curious glances, but increasingly fewer hostile ones. In the afternoons, she often sat with the women of the settlement, learning their weaving patterns and listening to their stories, absorbing the Norse language and customs. Quentin, meanwhile, spent his days in council with Jarl Halvard and the other warriors, preparing for the thing and the disputes that would be settled there. But his evenings were spent with Elina, walking along the shoreline or sitting by the hearth in Freya's house, teaching her Norse sagas or learning Saxon folktales in return. On the 8th day, he took her to the outskirts of the settlement, where a small grove of birch trees surrounded a bubbling spring. This is a sacred place, he explained as they sat on a fallen log beside the clear water. Sacred to Frigg, wife of Odin and goddess of foresight. Elina trailed her fingers through the cool water. Do you come here often? Before voyages, he admitted, to ask for safe passage, and after, to give thanks. She looked up at him, studying his face in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the new spring leaves. You truly believe in your gods, don't you? It's not just tradition. As you believe in yours, I imagine, he replied. Though I've noticed you don't wear a cross. Her hand went unconsciously to her throat. I left it behind. It was a gift from Ethelred, my betrothed. She gave a small, bitter laugh. The man who left me sitting on those dock crates. Quentin's jaw tightened. He was a fool. Was he? Elina sighed. Sometimes I think he saw something in me that others didn't, something unsuitable. Such as, she was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. I never fit comfortably into the life expected of a Saxon noblewoman. I asked too many questions. I was too interested in the world beyond our shores. She glanced at him. I learned Norse, didn't I? Quentin laughed, the sound echoing in the peaceful grove. Yes, you did. Though your accent is still terrible. She splashed water at him in mock offense. And he caught her hand, their laughter fading as their eyes met. Without thinking, he reached up to touch her cheek, brushing away a droplet of water that clung to her skin. Elina, he said softly, I think I understand why the gods placed you in my path. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. A young Viking warrior named Ulfr stood at the edge of the grove, his expression dark. Quentin, he called. You're needed at the hall. There's been word from Northumbria. Quentin rose immediately, helping Elina to her feet. What word? Ulfr's eyes flickered to Elina with undisguised suspicion. Saxon ships were spotted off our coast. We're ships. The news sent a ripple of tension through the settlement. By evening, the great hall was packed with warriors and elders, all debating the meaning of the Saxon ships. Quentin stood near Jarl Halvard, listening as reports were shared. 3 ships, said a grizzled sea captain named Torment. Were Norse, not trading vessels. They sailed along our coast for 2 days, then turned back toward England. Scouting, Halvard concluded grimly. They're planning something. Or responding to something, said an elder, his white beard nearly reaching his belt. Perhaps to our attempted raid on Lindisfarne? All eyes turned to Quentin, who shifted uncomfortably. The raid failed. We took nothing, harmed no one. Except for the Saxon woman you brought back. Ulfr called out from the crowd. Perhaps she was important to them. Perhaps they come looking for her. A murmur ran through the assembly. Quentin straightened, his hand going to his sword hilt. Elina Sutton was abandoned by her people before we ever reached shore. She is no one they would seek. So you say? Ulfr pressed, stepping forward. But we have only your word and hers. For all we know, she could be sending messages, acting as a spy within our walls. That's enough. Ulfr, Halvard commanded, raising a hand. But the damage was done. Suspicion had been planted, and Quentin could see it taking root in the eyes of those gathered. The meeting ended with increased patrols ordered along the coast and a warning for all to be vigilant. As Quentin made his way back to Freya's house, he could feel the changed atmosphere, the glances that followed him, the whispered conversations that stopped as he passed. He found Elina sitting alone by the hearth, her face pale in the firelight. You've heard, he said, closing the door behind him. She nodded. Freya told me. She thought I should know why people were suddenly looking at me as if I were carrying plague. She looked up at him, her eyes troubled. Is it because of me? Are they truly coming because of me? Quentin shook his head, sitting beside her on the bench. No. You heard Ulfr. They sailed along the coast, and then returned to England. If they were searching for someone, they would have made landfall, asked questions. Then why? Northumbria and the Danish settlements have had an uneasy peace for years, he explained. It waxes and wanes like the moon. Perhaps they simply wanted to remind us they are watching. Elina wrapped her arms around herself, staring into the fire. I should leave. My presence is only making things more difficult for you. No. The word came out more forcefully than he intended, causing her to look at him in surprise. He softened his tone. No. The thing begins in 3 days. After that, if you still wish to return to England, I will arrange it. But not because of Ulfr's accusations or the settlement's suspicions. Why are you so determined to protect me? She asked, the question that had hung between them since that first day at the harbor. Quentin took a deep breath, finally allowing himself to acknowledge what he had been feeling with growing certainty. Because from the moment I saw you sitting on those dock crates, something in me recognized something in you. As if, he struggled to find the words. As if our souls had known each other in some previous life. He expected her to laugh, to dismiss such a pagan notion. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. I felt it too, she whispered. That's why I came with you. A stranger, an enemy by birth. It made no sense. It still makes no sense, he said with a rueful smile. A Viking warrior and a Saxon noblewoman. Perhaps sense is overrated, she replied, and before he could respond, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, but deepened as Quentin pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her golden hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. If we do this, he said softly, there will be no going back. Not for either of us. I left back the moment I stepped onto your ship, Elina replied. I choose forward. With you. The thing began on a clear spring morning, with delegates from all the surrounding settlements gathering in Hedeby's central square. Platforms had been erected, and the law speakers, men who had memorized the oral laws of their people, stood ready to recite them for the assembly. Elina watched from the edge of the crowd, Freya at her side. Over the past days, a cautious friendship had developed between the two women, born of shared tasks and Freya's grudging admission that Elina's weaving skill was acceptable for a Saxon. Will Quentin speak today? Elina asked, searching the gathering for his familiar figure. Freya nodded. He will present the matter of the Saxon ships to the full assembly. And, she hesitated, glancing sideways at Elina. He plans to announce something else as well. Before Elina could question her further, a horn sounded, signaling the start of the proceedings. Jarl Halvard stepped onto the central platform, raising his hands for silence. For hours, the assembly dealt with matters of law and dispute, boundaries contested, debts unpaid, marriages arranged. Elina watched, fascinated by the democratic nature of it all, so different from the hierarchy of Saxon courts she had known. Finally, as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Halvard called Quentin forward to address the matter of the Saxon ships. He stood tall on the platform, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd as he recounted what was known and recommended increased vigilance, but not aggression. "We have peace with Northumbria," he concluded. "Unless they break it with action, not merely presence, we should maintain it." There were murmurs of both agreement and dissent from the crowd. Ulfr pushed his way to the front, calling out, "And what of the Saxon woman? How can we trust peace when we harbor one of their own?" Before Quentin could respond, another voice rang out, Elina's, clear and steady as she stepped forward. "I would speak to the assembly, if I may." A shocked silence fell. Women could speak at the thing, but for a foreigner, a Saxon, to request such a right was unprecedented. Halvard looked to Quentin, who nodded once, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "Approach," Halvard said finally. Elina made her way to the platform, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. She took a deep breath, then began to speak in careful Norse. "I am Elina Sutton of Northumbria. I came to your shores not as a spy or a threat, but as someone seeking a new beginning. My own people had cast me aside." She looked around the assembly, meeting their gazes directly. "I understand your suspicion. If a Viking woman had appeared in my homeland, she would have been met with the same. But I have lived among you now, learned your ways, shared your work. I have come to respect your people, your strength, your fairness, your devotion to family and community." She paused, gathering courage for what she would say next. "I have also come to love one of your own. Quentin Yormunson has shown me that the divisions between our peoples are not as fixed as we believe, that we can choose a different path." A murmur ran through the crowd. Quentin stepped forward to stand beside her, taking her hand in full view of the assembly. "What Elina says is true," he declared. "I love her, and I intend to make her my wife, if she will have me, and if the assembly will accept our union." The murmur became a roar of voices, some supportive, many outraged. Halvard raised his hands again for silence, his expression grave. "This is unprecedented," he said when the noise had died down. "A union between Viking and Saxon nobility has not been sanctioned in living memory." "Perhaps it's time," came a voice from the crowd. It was Freya, stepping forward to stand at the base of the platform. "If we seek true peace with Northumbria, what better symbol than such a marriage? Or what better way to invite disaster?" countered Ulfr. "The Christians will see it as us taking one of their women, an act of aggression." "I have chosen this freely," Elina insisted, "and I will renounce my Saxon claims and titles. I choose to be Viking now." The debate raged on as the sun began to set, with opinions divided sharply. Finally, Halvard called for a vote, a show of hands from all free men and women of the assembly. "Those in favor of allowing this union, raise your hands," he commanded. Elina held her breath as hands began to rise, first a few, then more. Freya's hand shot up decisively. Old Tormund, after a moment's hesitation, raised his weathered hand as well. Gradually, nearly half the assembly had their hands raised. "Those opposed," Halvard continued. Ulfr's hand went up immediately, followed by many others. As the count was taken, it became clear the assembly was almost evenly divided. Halvard conferred briefly with the other leaders, then turned back to the crowd. "The assembly is split, which means the decision falls to me as Jarl." He looked at Quentin, his oldest friend, and at Elina, the Saxon woman who had somehow won the respect of many in his settlement. "I have known Quentin Yormunson since we were boys learning to hold a sword," he said finally. "His judgment in battle has never failed us. His loyalty has never wavered." He paused. "Until now, when his heart has led him to divided loyalty." Quentin stiffened, but Halvard raised a hand. "And yet, perhaps divided loyalty is exactly what our peoples need. Someone who can stand with a foot in each world." He straightened, his decision made. I approve this union, on one condition, that it take place after we have confirmed the Saxons have no hostile intent toward our settlements. If they come in peace, then perhaps this marriage can indeed be a symbol of a new understanding between our peoples. Relief washed over Elina, and she felt Quentin's hand tighten around hers. Not an outright victory, but not defeat either. A chance. The following days were tense in Hedeby. Ships were sent to patrol the coast. Warriors stood ready, and Elina found herself the subject of intense scrutiny from all sides. Some, following Freya's lead, had begun to accept her presence. Others, aligned with Ulfr, watched her with open hostility. Through it all, Quentin remained steadfast at her side, neither hiding their relationship nor flaunting it. In the evenings, they would escape the settlement's watchful eyes, walking along the shore or sitting in the sacred grove, planning a future that still hung in the balance. If the Saxons do come with hostile intent, Elina said one evening as they sat watching the sunset over the water, what will happen to us? Quentin's arm tightened around her shoulders. We will face it together. Perhaps leave Hedeby, find another settlement more accepting. Or England, she suggested. There are places along the coast where Vikings and Saxons live in relative peace. He nodded, though they both knew returning to Northumbria would bring its own dangers. Wherever we go together, he promised. It was on the 10th day after the thing that the scout ships returned, bringing news that sent the settlement into a frenzy of preparation. Saxon ships had been spotted again, this time definitely heading toward Hedeby, 5 vessels, heavily manned. They will be here by morning, Halvard announced grimly to the assembled warriors in the great hall. We must prepare for battle. Quentin stood among them, his heart heavy. If it came to war, where would that leave Elina? Where would it leave them? Wait, he said, stepping forward. Let me take a small boat out to meet them before they reach our shores. If they come for war, I will return with warning. If they come for parley, perhaps bloodshed can be avoided. Halvard considered the proposal, then nodded. Take 3 men with you. At the first sign of treachery, return at once. As the meeting broke up, Quentin sought out Elina, finding her at Freya's house, helping to prepare bandages for the anticipated wounded. I'm going out to meet the Saxon ships, he told her without preamble, to determine their purpose. She set down the linen she was cutting, her face pale. Let me come with you. It's too dangerous, he began, but she cut him off. I'm Saxon. I speak their language as a native. I know their customs. I might see intentions or signals you would miss. She took his hands in hers. And if they do come for war, would you leave me here, where some still suspect me of being their spy? He hadn't considered that. If fighting broke out, Elina's position in the settlement would become untenable. Ulfr and his supporters might even take matters into their own hands. Very well, he agreed reluctantly. But you stay in the boat unless I say otherwise. They set out at dawn, a small craft with Quentin, Elina, and 2 seasoned warriors named Leif and Gunnar. The morning mist lay heavy on the water, shrouding the approaching Saxon fleet until they were less than half a mile away. There, Leif pointed, as the silhouette of the lead ship emerged from the fog. Saxon build, but not a war vessel as we feared. A trading ship, though heavily manned. Quentin frowned, studying the approaching vessel. Hail them, he ordered, and Gunnar stood, waving a white cloth attached to a spear shaft. The Saxon ship adjusted course, moving toward their small boat. As it drew nearer, Elina gasped, grabbing Quentin's arm. I know that ship, she whispered urgently. It belongs to my father. Before Quentin could respond, a figure appeared at the rail of the approaching vessel, a tall man with graying hair and a bearing that marked him as nobility even at a distance. Father, Elina called out, standing despite Quentin's warning hand on her arm. Father, it's me. The man at the rail stiffened, then leaned forward, straining to see through the mist. Elina? His voice carried across the water, disbelieving. By all that's holy, is that you? Within the hour, 2 boats had been lashed together in the neutral water between Hedeby and the Saxon fleet. In one sat Quentin, Elina, and her father, Lord Elina Sutton. In the other, Jarl Halvard and 2 of his advisors faced 3 Saxon nobles who had accompanied Lord Sutton. I came searching for my daughter, Lord Sutton explained, his eyes rarely leaving Elina's face, as if he feared she might vanish again. When word reached us that a Saxon woman had been taken during the attempted raid on Lindisfarne, I feared the worst. I wasn't taken, father, Elina said firmly. I chose to go with Quentin. Lord Sutton's expression hardened as he looked at the Viking warrior. And why would my daughter, a Christian noblewoman betrothed to Ethelred of Wessex, choose to go with a pagan raider? Ethelred left me at the altar, Elina replied, her voice tight with old pain. He took my dowry and fled with the merchant's daughter. I was sitting alone at the harbor when the Vikings came. Shock registered on her father's face. Left you? I had no word of this. When you disappeared, we assumed. He trailed off, looking from his daughter to Quentin with new understanding. You protected her. Quentin nodded. And now I wish to marry her, with your blessing if possible, without it if necessary. A tense silence fell over the boats. In the second vessel, Halvard and the Saxon nobles had fallen quiet, watching the family drama unfold. Lord Sutton ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking older than his years. Elina, do you know what you're saying? To marry a Viking would mean giving up everything, your home, your faith, your inheritance. I have found a new home here, she said softly. As for faith, she glanced at Quentin. We have spoken of this. Our children will know both traditions and choose their own path when they are old enough. Children, her father echoed, a mix of emotions crossing his face. I had hoped for grandchildren. I never imagined they would be half Viking. They will be holy themselves, Quentin said, and they will know their Saxon grandfather, if he wishes it. Lord Sutton studied him for a long moment. You speak our language well, for a Northman. My father believed knowledge was a weapon sharper than steel, Quentin replied, deliberately echoing what Elina had once told him about her own father. A reluctant smile tugged at Lord Sutton's lips. A sentiment we share, it seems. He sighed deeply. I came prepared for war, to rescue my daughter from captivity. I find instead she has captured the heart of a Viking. He turned to Halvard in the other boat. Jarl Halvard, I propose a different kind of alliance than either of us anticipated. A marriage bond between our families, and with it, a formal peace between Hedeby and Northumbria. Halvard's eyebrows rose in surprise. You would sanction this union? If it brings peace instead of bloodshed, yes. Lord Sutton looked back at his daughter. And if it brings happiness to my only child, whom I thought lost to me forever. Tears welled in Elina's eyes as she reached for her father's hand. Thank you, she whispered. Halvard conferred briefly with his advisors, then nodded decisively. We accept this proposal. Let the marriage take place at the next full moon, with representatives from both our peoples in attendance. And so it was that on a midsummer night, beneath a full moon that silvered the waters of the harbor, Quentin Yormunson and Elina Sutton were joined in marriage. The ceremony combined elements of both their traditions, a handfasting with cords of red and white, vows spoken in both Norse and Saxon, rings exchanged that had been forged from metal contributed by both their families. Jarl Halvard stood for Quentin, while Lord Sutton gave away his daughter. Freya, now fully won over to her new sister by marriage, had woven Elina's bridal crown with her own hands. Even Ulfr, though still wary, had contributed a gift to the couple, a finely carved wooden chest to hold their most precious possessions. As the celebration continued into the night, with Saxon and Viking alike sharing mead and music around great bonfires, Quentin led his bride away from the noise, down to the quiet shoreline where their journey together had truly begun. Are you happy? He asked, his arms around her waist as they looked out over the moonlit water. Elina turned in his embrace, reaching up to touch his face. Happier than I ever imagined possible, she replied. Though I still don't understand why you came ashore that day, why you were watching me. Quentin smiled, taking her hand and placing it over his heart. Perhaps it was the Norns, weaving our fates together. Perhaps it was your God, guiding me to you. Or perhaps, he kissed her gently. Perhaps it was simply that a lost soul recognized another lost soul, and in that recognition, both found home. Home, Elina repeated, leaning into his embrace as the stars wheeled overhead and the tide came in. The tide went out, just as it had on that distant shore where their story began. Yes, we have found our home in each other. And in that moment, between the clash of cultures and the joining of hearts, a new saga was born, one that would be told for generations to come, of how love transcended the ancient hatreds of Viking and Saxon, creating a bridge between worlds that had once seemed impossibly divided. Before the year was out, Elina would bear their first child, a daughter with her mother's golden hair and her father's blue eyes, who would grow up speaking both languages, honoring both traditions. And in her, as in the union that created her, lay the promise of a future where differences need not divide, where the boundaries between peoples could be crossed by the simplest and yet most powerful of human emotions, love.